Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face. And yeah, welcome back to another card making video. I pulled out, it doesn't even get put away. It sits literally on my desk. Simon Says Stamps, Beautiful Flowers stamp set that I have done over 24 videos on. Yeah, since this one first came out way back in the day. This is my first big floral stamp set. I do have an entire playlist using this set as well as the Beautiful Flowers 2 stamp set, which I was going to use the second one. It's been discontinued. I'm a little sad. Serves me right for not pulling it out more often. So this one though is still available. So I'm going to keep using it. And I will have a link to the playlist. I think it goes this direction. You know, you keep watching a video. At the end of the video, I'll have a link to that playlist. There's, again, close to 36 videos altogether using this set and that other set in a bunch of different ways. And I just posted a video using Oxide inks and blending brushes to ink up a stamp. And I thought, and of course my brain immediately went to the stamp set and I was like, how would that look? And I just, you know, started mulling the ideas. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to combine it with this newer Elegantly Modern Greetings set, which I'm just loving. So I think we'll do a little bit of heat embossing. I've got some Oxide inks and some blending brushes, and let's just see what happens. So I was in a purple mood for these cards. So before I get to the actual inks, I started by getting everything ready. And the easiest way to do this is I've got 2 stamp and stencil mats. And one of them I'm putting just an A2 card front onto. And the second one I'm putting my card base with the inside of the card facing up. And putting them in the same spot on both of these stamp and stencil mats so that I can switch them out as I'm stamping. And then I'm going to line up my big Beautiful Flowers image on here. And this time I aligned it on the top. Normally, just out of habit, I always kind of want to angle it, you know, to fit as much of the image as possible on my card front. But this time I was like, ooh, if I stamp it like this, I'll be able to rotate it and stamp basically kind of the top and the bottom of the panel and the inside of the cards. So got that all lined up. Everything's ready to go. Now I'll get to inking, and I'm using Oxide inks and my blending brushes. And like I've mentioned, and like I said, I think in my previous video, depending on when I get things, you know, uploaded, I've done this with the blending brushes. I've also done this with my blending foams, like my, you know, distress blending foams, because for specifically my Oxide inks, I have dedicated foams for all of the Oxide inks and I keep them stored. If you search my channel, I did a video years ago on how I store them, everything, but they're saturated with each color of Oxide ink. And either one works. The nice thing about these brushes is I'm using larger brushes for the larger areas, smaller brushes for a little bit of the detail. So I applied Wilted Violet Oxide first with a large brush. I took Villainous Potion, that much darker purple, and kind of tapped that on kind of closer to the flower centers. It's a subtle effect. If you did more like contrasting colors, it would obviously show up a lot more, but it's just a little extra. And then I use ground espresso with a small brush on the centers. And then Mowed Lawn and Twisted Citron for the greenery. And obviously some of the colors are going to like mix and overlap a bit. And green and purple do make brown. It's fine. And stamped it. Then, without re-inking the stamp or doing anything, I removed that panel from my MISTI and then put in the card base here. And pressed down the lid again. And I'm getting the second generation stamping off of that stamp. So the exact same thing, just much lighter than the first one. So this way I'm getting the outside and the inside of the card done at the same time. So I'm going to repeat the process again. And now I've like super sped this up in editing, but even then it didn't take that long to do this. It's a little easier to see as I add more ink to the stamp, but for you guys, it's a lot harder to see because my stamp is so stained, obviously, because I've used it a bajillion times. But with the Oxide inks, you can see, you know, where the ink is going. And again, there is no need to go for like perfection, because one, it would take forever to try and keep the ink to like just to the leaves, just green for the leaves, just purple for the blooms. Like, I get it, in the general area, and then things can overlap a bit. It's fine. And I did the same thing. I stamped it onto the card front and then immediately put the card base into the MISTI and stamped it again. And I'm going to repeat this process for a second card, because why not? When I've got, I got a system going, I got everything out, why not? So I also use Post-it tape there at the score line of the card base so that I don't stamp past the score line on the inside of the card. And then I just do this all again. And when I'm done, I'm going to take my stamp and my stamp and stencil mats just to my sink, and I rinse the mats. I rinse off. I've mentioned this before. I don't wash them with anything. I just rinse them off with water, and whatever's left over, because some, permanent inks, certain things are just going to stain the mat. I don't care, but it will rinse off the Oxide inks, anything like that. The stamp itself, I washed in the sink with just some soap and water, because there was just so much Oxide ink in there. It gets in all the little grooves and everything, that it's just easier to wash it in the sink rather than wipe it 5 million times. Like when I'm working with Oxide inks, pigment inks, etc., doing things like this where there's just a lot of ink, it's so much easier to do. Just take it in the sink, rinse off with just water if they're like, oxides like this, or sometimes I'll take, just a little bit of dish soap, gently run it between my hands, that sort of a thing. I only do that with large stamps because it's guaranteed if it was a small stamp, I would lose it down the sink, or, that would happen. But this big old stamp wasn't going anywhere. So stamped it, re-inked, stamped onto the panel without re-inking it, stamp it onto the inside of the card. So then I've got my card fronts and my card bases all stamped, and you can see here just that difference, the first generation for the card front and the second generation on the inside. And then of course I'm going to add some splatter. So normally I would use Wilted Violet Distress Paint, but mine's in an order that hasn't arrived yet. So I pulled out Villainous Potion, and Villainous Potion is, the paint, it's so dark, it's almost black. Like, this color is, I want to paint walls with this color. It's so deep. But because it's so dark, for splatter, I didn't want to splatter it just like that because it does look black and I didn't want that. So I just put a drop of Villainous Potion just on my little palette, and I'm just adding a bit of Picket Fence. So just to lighten it up a bit, make it look a little more purple, a little less black. And it looks like there's a ton of paint here. There's actually not very much. It's just, spread around as I'm mixing it. So I just mixed up with my fan brush. I added just a couple little drops of water just to thin it out a little bit more so that I can get a decent little splatter with this. And then I'm going to splatter all over both of these backgrounds here, keeping the splatter pretty fine. Because again, there's not a lot of paint here. If I really loaded up this brush, I'd get, the big splotches and everything that I love. But for these, I didn't want that. I just wanted just a nice fine splatter all over these. And then again, immediately cleaned off my palette and I washed this brush. Usually I just swirl my brush in one of my little like watercolor jars of water. But again, with that Villainous Potion, it's so pigmented. I washed that with a bit of soap just to remove it because it looked clean. And then when I added a bit of soap, it's like, oh no, there's still purple pigment in this. Because yeah, Villainous Potion is just chef's kiss of a color. Like, love. Anyway, sentiments. I pulled out a dark purple cardstock from my stash and I used my anti-static powder tool on it. And then I stamped one of the greetings from the Elegantly Modern Greeting set with clear embossing ink. And then I coated that with Simon's gold embossing powder. I'm going to melt this with my heat tool. Once everything is smooth and melted and shiny and fabulous, because purple and gold, I wasn't even going to add gold to these cards. And then I was just like, yeah, no, it needs gold. So after the, it cooled for a few seconds, I removed that excess anti-static powder just with one of my little microfiber cloths. And then I'm going to tape the coordinating wafer die into place with just little bits of washi tape so that the wafer die doesn't move when I run it through my die cut machine. And I'm going to die cut these sentiments. And then the other thing I die cut, I also trimmed down these panels just slightly smaller than the card base. I used my guillotine trimmer and took like 1/8 of an inch off every side. So it ends up being like 4 inches by 5 1/4, something like that. But I also die cut some of Simon's matte gold cardstock. I used the Frames wafer die set that I used in a recent video. This is an old die set. Like this one's been out for like almost a decade. Still one of my favorites. And the funny thing is this like fancy little frame, I don't think I've ever used this ever. I always use just a rectangle frame from that set. Don't ask me why. It's just what I do. But and that's what I was going to use, was the rectangle. And I was like, oh, this is really cute. And this will work just to kind of frame just the sentiment. So die cut the matte gold cardstock with that. I put the panel in my MISTI and kind of lined everything up where, it's going to go. And then I'm going to stamp this little companion sentiment from that same Elegantly Modern Greetings set with Villainous Potion Oxide ink. So got that lined up, stamped that, stuck the second panel in there, stamped it again. And then now I can start assembling this card front. And to adhere this little delicate frame, I'm just using my craft tacky glue that I have in one of these little Gina K precision bottles, because it's got the nice little fine tip on there, and just little tiny dots of glue on the back of this. And then I'm going to pop this into place on the card front here. And then once that's popped into place, the die cut sentiment, I'm going to pop up with some foam squares just to give that a little bit more depth and dimension. You could also just die cut scraps of cardstock with that same coordinating wafer die. That would also work. But yeah, foam squares, why not? Cut them in half, stuck them on the back of this, and then pop that into place. And then I repeated the process for the second card front. And I decided not to stamp any other sentiments on like the inside of the card because the florals are more than enough. Also, if for those that don't watch all my videos, what I stamped on the inside of the card, I will write over that. Does not faze me at all. That's also why I wanted the second generation, so it was slightly lighter, but I'll write over it when, I give this to someone. So got everything adhered to my card bases. And then as a final bit of bling and to bring out a bit more of the gold, I pulled out the Pink Fresh glitter drops in gold and arranged those how I wanted onto both of these cards, adhered them into place with craft tacky glue, and that finished them off. So like I mentioned earlier, I will have a link to my playlist using this stamp set in a bajillion different ways. I'll have a link to that at the end of this video. And as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. I'll have my supply list with clickable links below the video as well as on my blog post. So you can check that out below if you are interested. Thank you all so very much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs up in, commenting, telling the robot overlords you guys like what you see. Subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.